Okay, so how many of you guys have ever heard of the Gypsy Rose case? How many of you guys have ever heard of Munchausen syndrome? So these two things are kind of closely related, and I will be going a little bit more in depth into that in a little bit. So for now, just imagine a person who specifically and deliberately puts harm on themselves or someone close to them just for the attention and sympathy of others. I know it sounds a little bit out there, but this is a real disorder and a real mental syndrome that can have very strong, sad, lasting effects if left untreated. So it is quite challenging to actually get a number or a percentage of people with this disorder, since being untruthful is a major trait with it. So it is a little bit hard to confirm with that. So it's not wise to actually take a potential patient with this disorder's word for it, which does sound a little bit opinionated, but it has been kind of set by researchers and everything like that. Okay, so kind of to start with a little statistic to kind of keep the number in your head and everything throughout. So according to the National Library of Medicine, the disorder of exaggeration has been found in about 1.3% of all hospitalized patients, and about 10% have been associated with the Munchausen syndrome specifically. So I know this kind of sounds a little bit confusing, but to keep things a little brief and everything like that, when a lot of people feel like they have a symptom of something, they'll just look it up on Wikipedia or something, and that's what will give you kind of the exaggerated answer, and that just doesn't make things easier for you, kind of. It's kind of give you a little bit of an idea what that. It's usually your exaggerated answer, what you'll find online. So, I know I kind of spoke about this a little bit, but today I'm going to be explaining to you guys what Munchausen syndrome is, as well as its sister syndrome of Munchausen's by proxy. We'll also be doing a real-world application and case with this to kind of shake things up and keep it a little interesting. So hopefully by the end of this speech you will be informed on the syndromes, as well as being able to do your own real-world application on certain true crime cases or something, because they can overlap. Okay, so now that I've given you kind of an idea of what I'll be speaking about today, it's time to give a little bit of basic information on what Munchausen syndrome is. Okay, so kind of according to Brennan Weber and Michael C. Doyle, this can have many different names, but another name for Munchausen syndrome is fictitious disorder imposed on self, FDIS, which basically means faking disorders on yourself. So it's basically just a psychological condition where someone fakes illness and everything on themselves, kind of as I said already. So the symptoms of this can vary, and that's why I said they could be pretty much anything, because someone could be faking symptoms of like schizophrenia, for example, and say that they're hearing or seeing things that aren't really there, kind of that type of thing. So the origin of this goes kind of back to German aristocrat Baron Munchausen, because he was known to overly exaggerate stories of his endeavors and things like that. So that kind of gives a little explanation to kind of where we started and where we're at with this syndrome. Okay, so now that I've given you kind of a good idea of Munchausen syndrome, it's time to talk about its sister syndrome of Munchausen by proxy. Okay, so with Munchausen by proxy, it's very similar, but this kind of has multiple people involved. So this is kind of an abusive relationship between a caregiver and whoever's in their care. So that's when they are hurting the child or whoever's in their care and forcing unnecessary treatments onto them, which can be very harmful in the long run, because unnecessary treatments can cause animosity between the two people if the person finds out, and just it's the whole chain of events there. So for the symptoms of this, these are pretty similar to the generic Munchausen syndrome. So the symptoms of major illnesses are faked, but in this instance, they are imposed on another and not on oneself. Okay, so to kind of have a statistic for this, to kind of keep things a little bit in order here, in a study done by Gregory Yates and Christopher Bass, showed that in 796 cases of Munchausen syndrome, 97.6% of abusers were female, 95.6% were the victim's mother, and then 45.6% of people, to keep a baseline, were kind of in the healthcare or medical field or had a background of it. Okay, so now that you know about these two syndromes, it's kind of time to talk about a real-world application to kind of keep things a little interesting and everything like that. Okay, so according to the Associated Press, this is kind of just a little quick brief real-world application here. So for this, with the fake illnesses, Gypsy's mom, Dee Dee, did force her daughter, Gypsy, to believe that she had leukemia, muscular dystrophy, as well as, I think I said leukemia, cerebral palsy. So she was forced to shave her head most of the time and forced to be confined into a wheelchair because she did have diseases that lined up with that. Quotes on that because they were faked. And that wasn't found out until after what I'm about to tell you. So this did cause Gypsy to go under a bunch of unnecessary procedures that weren't needed. So getting her salivary glands removed and also getting her teeth removed because she was on a bunch of medications and that messed up her teeth. So that was sad as well. So with this, there was a lot of isolation for Gypsy. Dee Dee never gave her much of a personal life. She had no independence. She wasn't even allowed to speak to her neighbors without her mother being present. So, and the abuse did get bad to a point where Gypsy was confined to her room and locked up with chains, which is very sad to find out. And this stuff wasn't found out until after. So, her mother just loved the attention of having an ill child, which made things very difficult and sad. So this outcome is very sad if you do know the case, but this all became too much for Gypsy, so she did convince her boyfriend to kill her mother. So when this all happened, when Dee Dee was found, all of the medications, everything was found, and then Gypsy was found to not even need a wheelchair when she appeared in court and everything like that. So that kind of shows you just how bad things can be with this. So now that you know about this disorder and the real world application, it's time to give you kind of a good summary here. Okay, so I do want you to remember that Munchausen syndrome is a serious psychological condition that involves faking illness. Munchausen's by proxy is a form of abuse where the abusers are usually the mothers. This is shown with a 95.6% study done. And this is also a serious issue with major effects if left untreated, Gypsy Rose case. So the next time you're kind of thinking about a disorder or anything like that, I want you to kind of keep this one in your head because this is a very major one that does have very strong effects, as you've seen with the real world application.